The hero's journey is a story template that has been commonly used in stories for generations across multiple cultures. It is a template that can be adapted to books, TV shows, short stories, plays, and most importantly, films. There are plenty of classic and modern day films that use the hero's journey as a reference for their script, since it is a timeless template and can be applied to any setting, context, and characters. The two we will be discussing today are two classics: The Wizard of Oz and Star Wars, or Star Wars A New Hope. I will be discussing how the monomyth can show anybody that even a humble children's musical and an action-adventure science fiction fantasy movie can have the same story when you strip away the context of the films. But first, a little history on the monomyth. The monomyth is something that has always been around, but there was never a name put to it until 1949 when The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell was published, which is a book that analyzes archetypes of world mythology. This is particularly interesting because The Wizard of Oz was created 10 years before The Hero with a Thousand Faces had been released, and the monomyth was fully acknowledged and developed into a common story template still used today, which goes to show that it had always been around, but there was just never a name to it. The Wizard of Oz was directed by Victor Fleming and stars Judy Garland, who plays Dorothy Gale, a young girl from Kansas who is sucked up into a tornado and transported into the magical land of Oz, where she now has to go to the Wizard of Oz so that she can ask him to take her back to Kansas. And Star Wars was directed by George Lucas and was released in 1979 and stars Mark Hamill, who plays Luke Skywalker, a young farm boy who goes on an adventure to save the princess and fight against the Galactic Empire. In A Hero with a Thousand Faces, the monomyth is broken down into 3 sections and 12 basic story beats. The 3 sections are 1. Introduction to setting, characters, and conflict. 2. Action, climax, and triumph. And 3. Resolution and denouement. I will now be showing where each story beat of the hero's journey is represented within both films. Starting off our journey, we have the ordinary world. This is meant to show a regular day in the life for our hero before their adventure starts. In Star Wars, it is Luke's home planet Tatooine, where he is living the life of a farm boy with his aunt and uncle. In The Wizard of Oz, similar to Luke, Dorothy is also living the life of a farm girl with her aunt and uncle. However, she comes from a more familiar hometown of the prairies of Kansas. There are many political and economic symbols hidden inside The Wizard of Oz, which reference the political landscape of America in the 1890s. Which is when the original book was written. Within this allegory, Dorothy is meant to represent the average American. More on this later. The next step in our journey is the call to adventure. This is when our hero is first booted out of their comfort zone and offered, or in some cases, told to start their adventure. In Star Wars, the call to adventure comes in the form of R2-D2 and Ben Kenobi, who tells Luke that he must come to Alderaan to help Princess Leia. In The Wizard of Oz, the call to adventure comes in the form of a tornado that takes Dorothy away. It can also be said that she herself is the call to her own adventure, since she is the one that wanted to run away from home in the first place and leave her ordinary world. Next, we have refusal of the call. This happens when the hero refuses their call to action. In Star Wars, the refusal of the call comes when Luke refuses Ben Kenobi's offer for Luke to come to Alderaan with him, saying that he has to stay on Tatooine to help his aunt and uncle for another farm season. Refusal of the call can be seen in 2 forms in The Wizard of Oz. If you are looking at the tornado as the call to adventure, then she refuses the call when she tells the Witch of the North that she cannot go to Emerald City without her. But if Dorothy herself is the call to adventure, then she refuses the call when the professor tells her that her aunt is ill and she runs back home. The next step is meeting the mentor. This is when our hero meets their mentor figure for the film. The mentor comes in the form of Ben Kenobi in Star Wars, and Luke meets the mentor after being attacked by the Sand People and Kenobi saves him. In The Wizard of Oz, the mentor is Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, which Dorothy meets after landing a house on the Witch of the East. And now for the final step in section 1, which is crossing the threshold. The hero is now committed to the adventure and crosses the threshold into the other world. In Star Wars, Luke crosses the threshold when he discovers that the stormtroopers that have attacked his farm have left his aunt and uncle dead. Dorothy crosses the threshold when she makes the choice to follow the yellow brick road despite the threats of the Wicked Witch of the East. Within the political context of The Wizard of Oz, the yellow brick road is supposed to represent the gold standard of America. Dorothy is meant to follow the yellow brick road home, when really that is not the way home. Her ruby slippers end up being the way back to Kansas for Dorothy. Therefore, the gold standard in The Wizard of Oz is shown to be a false standard. Oz himself is meant to represent politicians, promising all of these things to the characters, but never actually following through with them. Now, starting with Section 2 with tests, allies, and enemies. The hero faces new challenges, encounters enemies and allies. Luke meets Han Solo and Chewbacca, and on the Millennium Falcon begins to train in the ways of the Force. In The Wizard of Oz, this story beat comes when she meets the Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow, and she meets some enemies on the way, like when she encounters the Witch and gets threatened again, and when she is talking to the trees. Within the political allegory of The Wizard of Oz, each of the characters that Dorothy meets are meant to represent an aspect of America in 1890. The Scarecrow is meant to represent farmers. The Scarecrow thinks he doesn't have a brain, which parallels the view that some Americans had of farmers at the time. The Tin Man is meant to represent a dehumanized and mistreated factory worker. The Tin Man has no heart, which represents that self-worth that had been chipped away from factory workers at the time. And finally, the Lion is meant to represent politician William Jennings Bryan, who was a hero of the populist movement at the time. Bryan was often referred to as a lion in the press, and he was often a huge supporter of moving away from a gold standard. Dorothy and the Witch both compete for the slippers on Dorothy's feet, just as the Rebellion and the Empire compete for the Death Star's plans in R2-D2. Both of these items in their respective movies represent hope. For Luke, it's the hope that one day they can overthrow the Galactic Empire, and for Dorothy, it's the hope that one day she can make it home to Kansas. Approach to the Inmost Cave. This is when our hero gets closer to their goal. In Star Wars, the approach to the Inmost Cave happens when the crew discovers that Alderaan has been destroyed and comes across the Death Star, and they are pulled in by a tractor beam. In The Wizard of Oz, it comes when Dorothy is kidnapped by the witch and has to choose between giving up the slippers or saving Toto. The approach could also be when they first see the Wizard of Oz and he tells them to defeat the Witch of the West. The next step is the ordeal. The hero is now faced with their biggest test so far. In Star Wars, this comes in the form of when they discover the princess is being held captive on the Death Star. They rescue her, and Kenobi deactivates the tractor beam, sacrificing himself to Vader, and the crew escape on the Falcon. In The Wizard of Oz, it comes when Dorothy's friends try to rescue her from the castle, and Dorothy ends up accidentally killing the witch by splashing water on her. The next step is the reward. The hero is now very close to meeting their goal. The reward in Star Wars is that they now have the knowledge to destroy the Death Star. Dorothy's reward is supposed to be that the wizard can take her back to Kansas. However, she discovers that the Wizard of Oz is a fraud. Her real reward is the knowledge that the adults and authority figures are just as the same as her, and she learns to believe in herself just as Oz teaches the other characters. And now moving on to Section 3, starting with the road back. The hero's goal may be a little bit further away than they thought. In Star Wars, the road back is when Luke, Han, and Leia defend the Death Star plans with the Falcon on their way back to the Rebel base. In The Wizard of Oz, it comes when the wizard is about to take Dorothy back to Kansas. However, Toto jumps out of the balloon and chases after a cat, causing Dorothy to go after Toto, and the balloon leaves without her. Next, we have Resurrection. Our hero's last test is met. In Star Wars, the resurrection comes when the rebellion attacks the Death Star, and Luke is able to resurrect his powers from earlier and uses the Force to shoot the sole weak point of the Death Star and destroy it. Dorothy is resurrected when the witch tells her that she has the power to get home from the very beginning, and she just had to learn the lesson to believe in herself. And finally, we have Return. Our hero now has a triumphant return home. However, they are a different person than when they had left. Luke, Han, and Chewie return to the Rebel base, and they receive medals for their heroic journey. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy awakens in her bed in Kansas with the power of self-belief. Now, you might have noticed that I was delving very deep into the context and allegories in The Wizard of Oz, but not really going that deep into Star Wars. Well, that's because Star Wars was one of the first popular movies to just be about having a fun adventure, and that is an okay thing. Star Wars was a one-of-a-kind movie when it first came out. There weren't any of these action-adventure movies out at the time, and critics did not know how to react to it. In a review by Roger Ebert, he refers to his experience watching Star Wars as an out-of-body experience, and applauds the movie for how beautifully simple and surface-level the movie truly is. This goes back to the first thing you see when you watch any Star Wars movie. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. This setting works to the movie's advantage since most sci-fi movies are set in the future and involve humans, and are usually trying to say something about humanity and where we could end up in the distant future. Having this setting allows Star Wars to be completely disconnected from our world entirely and fully just let the story speak for itself, which is kind of what the hero's journey is all about. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey.